Let me just talk and you talk.
All right.
That's how podcasts work.
Yeah, that is how it works, I guess.
Talking makes the podcast go around, the podcast
Let's
go
go
around, the
around.
podcast go
Maybe
around.
this time he'll stay.
Welcome to VCR, a vintage cinema rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake,
And I'm Michael.
and this is part 2 of our Cabaret film discussion, our 1973 rewind to the Oscars, comparing to one of the greatest films of all time, The Godfather.
Yeah, you might have heard of it.
Yeah, and so this is our deep dive on Cabaret, a film that won the more awards than The Godfather, but not the awards, the Best Picture award.
That's right.
So before we get into things, I just want to quickly say that if you've ever seen Cabaret and you aren't sure if it's for you, go check out our episode from last week where we talk about it in a spoiler-free discussion. This is the spoiler-full discussion, kind of expecting you to have already seen the film.
We're going to ruin it.
We're going to ruin a lot. We're going to just absolutely destroy this film.
That's right. It's going to break
No.
your hearts. Just like this movie broke our hearts.
Not that bad, but
Okay.
anyway, before we get into Oscars discussions, let's talk in front of the camera and work our way back. So I want to start again with kind of the beginning of the film. The opening number really draws you into this film, or
Yeah.
really drew me into this film personally.
The opening shot was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the like distorted glass,
Hmm.
and then the master of ceremonies pops his head in.
Yes.
Pretty cool.
It's a really great music piece. The choreography is very good in the first one, and so I was like, you know what? At that point, I was like, I think I'm gonna really like this.
Yeah,
movie.
I'm a little pumped,
And
right?
yeah, like at the first impression of this movie, I was really high on it, actually.
But then you came down.
Unfortunately, but and that's I guess the highlight of the film as well for me is Joel Grey's performance as the Master of Ceremonies. He's just such an enigmatic force throughout the film. It's weird because he's like not a character, but he is a character in the film.
There's something very arresting about him too. Like I was
Yeah.
actually me and my roommate were kind of watching today, and I was like, he's like tall and gaunt, and like he's got this like white powder on his face that just makes his teeth look extra yellow.
Right.
Like he's almost kind of like Slender Man's more flamboyant.
Yeah, like at what
cousin.
point I was like, is this man supposed to represent the devil?
Kinda, yeah. Like he's very, and he's like extremely effeminate, like
Hmm.
giving kisses every now and then. So, yeah, he's very enigmatic is a good word for him.
Yeah, and he's really is the highlight of the movie for me. Like every time, and this is again like maybe in the musical sense, like the musical part of this film was my favorite part of this film by far. Like every performance was done extraordinarily well. Like not only the singing but the choreography, like I said. Even though none of the songs are necessarily like memorable bangers.
Well, there's a couple.
Okay, I'll give you that. But like it's a really interesting film in that sense because otherwise, like we kind of alluded to in the first part of this discussion, is the pacing of this film is very slow
Hmm.
because it takes place over I don't know how long necessarily, but it's kind of the rise of fascism and Nazism in Germany in the 30s.
It's a hot minute.
And we see kind of Sally and Brian's relationship and how it ebbs and flows through that time period. And I guess how even like they change over this time period as well against the backdrop of what's
Yeah.
happening. And maybe even how what's happening influences them as people as well.
Maybe a little bit. Well, it's interesting how, like I mentioned in our previous episode, the movie starts in 1931 and the Nazis are kind of more treated as like a nuisance.
Right.
And there's that opening scene moment where the club owner throws a Nazi out of the Kit Kat lounge. And then like 10, 20 minutes later, there's another musical number, but this time it's cross-cut with a group of Nazis beating the crap out of the club owner.
Right.
And that's a moment that was actually really clever and good, how it was just like, oh, like, yeah, right, it's Nazis. Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
this
exactly.
is not good.
And,
like,
and so while I'll say the film is really slow, one of the other things that I did appreciate about this musical is that the tone of the movie flows and shifts very well throughout. Like at parts it's a really lighthearted romp, and at other parts it's like kind of a tense pre-war period piece. And it's able to kind of navigate through that and make you feel for the proper responses to each of those moments.
Yeah, and even again, knowing the context of what's going to happen just makes it even more tragic.
Right.
Right? Like you always it's like when a movie or a show or a story spoils its own ending.
Mhm.
It's like when a movie or a show, it's like when a story has a tragic ending and it starts the story by spoiling it for you. So you always have that like your gut is always twisting
Right.
because you know things aren't going to end well. Kind of like the prequel trilogy,
Yeah.
which is I almost complimented the prequel trilogy, but
Well, and on that aspect as well, part of it is because we kind of know that Brian isn't fully a straight male person in the 30s, and being in Berlin at this time, you kind of know that he is doomed in this world. And
you know a lot of these characters are doomed.
yeah, especially because there are kind of our B plot with Fritz and Natalia, and Natalia's Jewishness is very much like doomed from the get-go. Like, you know that that's not going to lead to a happy ending with them.
No. And actually, I will say I was surprised by how much I liked Natalia.
Yeah.
Like she really
You should explain that,
yeah.
because that could sound really bad.
No, I mean like I really liked Natalia's bond with what I should say is I was surprised by how much I liked Natalia's bond with Sally.
Okay,
You know,
yeah,
cuz
yeah.
like there's this scene early on where Natalia's coming for an English lesson and Fritz is immediately like, "Oh, it's the daughter of that wealthy business owner. Like, I
Mhm,
better put the moves on her,
mhm.
right?" Because everybody's broke. So he's trying to get a meal ticket.
Right.
And Sally swoops in and she's like, "I need a drink." And, the whole deal is Brian uses her room as like a teaching studio when she's not around. So he has to convince her, like, no, 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 you can't drink. Like, she's very prim and proper. Like, you have to be on your best behavior.
Because he
And
needs the money.
right, everybody needs the money. So then she shows up and like everybody's kind of dancing on eggshells around her, but then Sally can't help but be like boisterous over the top.
Right.
There's that moment where she talks about screwing and it's very like, "Oh my,"
Yeah.
like teehee. But then there's another great scene later where Natalia asked to speak with Sally in private. And
Mhm.
so the whole thing is Sally is extremely sexually liberated. Like she's really,
Getting it.
she's really getting after it. Yeah, yeah. Which good for her.
Mhm.
But Natalia is still a virgin and her and Fritz had a sexual encounter.
Right. After she kind of was the
That's right.
inspiration behind it.
Yeah, so Fritz and Natalia start kind of dating, but Fritz is frustrated at how resistant she is to his advances. So
Yes, because they're not dating at this point. You say they're kind of dating, but they're really not. Like,
they're
there's
like
nothing there because he wants something, but she doesn't know how to initiate it with her.
right, and there's actually that great moment where Brian and Fritz go over to her place and she sees them out
Mhm.
and he kind of just he kisses her and it's the most like chaste non-committal kiss I've ever seen. And then she immediately kisses her dog.
Yeah.
It's like that was great. And Fritz is super frustrated and he's like, like doesn't he say something like, I have had girls from Switzerland and the UK go crazy for my kisses, but not this girl.
Right.
So Sally's advice to him is to just pounce on her.
To pounce.
To pounce. And so he takes her advice and it's all right, let's be honest, it's a little rapey by modern standards. By any standards.
Yeah.
It's a little it's questionable.
Yeah.
So Natalia is quite, she's
Perturbed by it.
she's perturbed, yeah, especially because at least according to her, like, she was surprised by how much she liked it
Right.
after the initial
Shock.
of the pounce.
Yeah.
So she tries to talk to Sally about it, and it's a really great scene again because they're just because of these two characters and their different attitudes towards that specific area of their life. Also, it's great because it kind of shows how callous and empty Sally can be a little bit, right?
It's
Like,
because she's like I said in the first episode, she's described as an endearing child, and that's really like apparent in these scenes, like especially that first scene when Natalia and Fritz show up to have their lessons. Like, you can see Sally, because Sally's not the center of attention in this.
Yeah.
It's Brian who's the center of attention, and everyone's there to see Brian.
Well, it's Natalia who's the center of attention.
Yes, yeah, actually, you're right there. Like, there's there to see Brian, but Natalia is the center of attention, and so
Yeah.
Sally's jealous of this. Not
Right.
not necessarily. She's not necessarily jealous because Fritz is attracted to Natalia. She's more jealous about the attention.
Yeah, well, Natalia's like this beautiful upper class woman that these two men are twisting themselves into knots to impress.
Right, but what I mean though is I don't think that she cares that they're attracted to her. I literally think that it is because they are more interested in her presence than they are of Sally's presence. It's not a sexual thing. It's like they are not paying attention to me and I am the center of attention.
Yeah, it's part of, yeah. I think it's also, it's partly like, maybe considering the sexual gender politics of the time, it's like, oh, well, she's, this beautiful, virginal, upper class woman. Like, we have to be on our best behavior for her. We have to impress her. It's almost like they're treating her as like, they're maybe treating her as like more valuable than someone like Sally, who's
Right.
considered, maybe by the standard of the time, she'd be considered like more of a fallen woman almost. Maybe less of a woman because of how liberated she is.
Yeah, like I could kind of see what you mean. I don't know if I necessarily agree with it still. Like I really think that it's just like she wants to be that center of attention. It's funny because I almost want to kind of analyze like Sally and her portrayal by Liza Minnelli right now, because when this movie started, I was like, I really admire the character that Sally is.
Yeah.
The first 10 minutes, I was like, I would spend this 10 minutes with Sally Bowles. Like I'm interested in seeing where the character of Sally Bowles goes. And by the end of the film, I was like, I have had enough of Sally Bowles.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like she's the kind of friend that I've had in real life where every like 3 to 6 months, I'm like, I want to go hang out with Sally Bowles and see how Sally Bowles is doing. And after like maybe 3-4 hours with Sally Bowles, I'm like, you know what? That was enough Sally Bowles for the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah, I got my fill.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, going back to that scene where Natalia kind of confides in her, I loved how, like, Natalia is clearly upset and kind of she needs to be comforted, but Sally really doesn't have the emotional bandwidth to comfort her.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think she even says, like, oh, come on, like, I'm no good if you cry, or like, I'm no good if you're not laughing. Like, it does show that there is kind of this almost insidious, like, shallowness to Sally.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, she's boisterous and warm and bubbly and like charismatic, but there's a kind of
emptiness,
emotional unavailability there.
Yeah, and you know what? I could almost empathize with that because I would say I'm probably not far. But
yeah, but we know, so
yeah.
It's fine. No, but like, no, I mean,
right.
I think you're doing yourself a disservice. Like, you're not.
Yeah, I'm not
empty.
trying to be the center of attention in every room.
Yeah. Also, you're not empty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting because she does a really, really great job with the performance. Like I think that Liza Minnelli deserved the Oscar that she won for this one because, like you said, there's a lot happening with Sally, and there's also not a lot there. Like it's I don't know what the word is right now because I've got COVID brain, but
it's almost no interiority.
Yeah,
like I said in our last episode, like a certain lack of depth.
Yeah, and you know what? The other kind of time that this actually kind of bubbles up, this was another very specific moment, is when Max, Brian, and Sally are together at his kind of retreat home, and they're having that dance together in that late evening, and you know, like you can feel the sexual tension in the room, especially between Brian and Max in this moment. And it feels like Sally's kind of oblivious to all of these things happening.
Yeah.
Like she's just like there, you know, like having fun and stuff, but she doesn't really understand the full grasp of the full weight of the situation and what it means for everybody in that room.
Yeah. Like, yeah. What Brian towards the end of the movie calls her an underage. He laughably calls her. he says something like, "Oh, you think you're some underage femme fatale?" Doesn't he say like, "I've had like after dinner mints more fatale than you?" And like, yeah, she is extremely. I'm really interested in like comedians and like performers and like the psychology of that, and like
Hmm.
how someone can be so charismatic and so great at their craft and come across as so like, you know, warm and inviting, but still there can be again that lack of depth,
Right.
that kind of emptiness. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
Sally really embodies that well.
Yeah, I agree. And on the flip side, I don't know if you want to talk about Brian too much as well, but Brian's almost a hard character to root for is maybe not the right word, but like he's such a blank slate at times. And
Yeah,
he's
that's a
just so
good point.
painfully shy that like I don't know that I necessarily cared as much about Brian's happy ending.
Yeah, because he does kind of get a happy ending, doesn't he?
Well,
Well, I
we
don't
we could
know.
talk about the ending, but like he just kind of happily divorces himself from Sally and this world of Berlin and goes back to Britain.
Yeah, I found myself a little better disposed towards Brian than I was towards Sally.
I agree.
But you're right. I don't really know that now that I was complaining a couple weeks ago that I didn't really feel like I had a solid enough grasp on Michael Corleone.
Yeah.
Like I felt like there was something a little hollow, or maybe it was hard to get my hands around the character.
Mm.
And now that I'm sitting here thinking about Brian, maybe it's kind of the same thing.
And that's kind of what I actually was hoping you'd bring up as well, because I think that's a really good comparison of the two. And it's funny because I would say that I also know Brian's in real life as well, that it's really just hard to pierce their outer shell and
Yeah.
understand who the person is behind them.
So it's almost maybe he's as walled off as Sally is.
Yeah, in a
Although,
way, absolutely. Especially because, and like as we find out, because of his sexual preferences, maybe a little bit why he's walled off as well, right?
yeah, like so when the movie starts, there's kind of this maybe romantic tension between him and Sally, and she kind of just brazenly propositions him at one point, and he sort of is just kind of like his excuse is, well, it's a little early for that, don't you think?
Right.
Like she offered him a glass of brandy, and she just says like, "Well, you like girls, don't you?" And he's like, "Sally, you don't just ask people questions like that." And she's like, "Well, I just did." And it turns out he's had sex with 3 different women and has not enjoyed it.
Yeah.
So he's doesn't really know what he is.
Yeah.
Anyways, later on, Sally gets stood up by her dad and she's upset, so he comforts her, and then they bone and he has a really good time. So
Yeah. And then
and
there's also the relationship with Max
and
too.
then there's
That
also the relationship with Max,
yeah.
which, by the way, I actually did watch this movie like 11 years ago. A friend from college showed it to
Oh
me.
no way.
Yeah, I didn't remember much, but I do vividly remember the scene where he says like screw Max, and she's like I do, and he's like so do I.
Yeah.
Like,
That is definitely one of the most quotable scenes in the entire
oh
movie.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And like watching it 10 years ago, I was like, oh my god. But like I can't imagine what audiences in 1972 were like.
Right.
That must have
Because
like
it's implied up to this point, and especially I guess at this point in history, but also at this point in movie history, this is definitely not like, it's more of a taboo subject than a mainstream subject at this point in time, right?
at that point, yeah.
And so for us, like I think were we kind of felt that implication between him and Max, but then when he just like blatantly says it, that's almost against his character even.
Kinda, yeah. Yeah,
And that's why it's so jarring.
right. And like I actually really liked so Sally and Max go on this big shopping spree, and like at this point, Brian is really clearly has a lot of antagonism towards Max, but it's unspoken.
Right.
And they went on this big shopping spree, and Max is like, "Oh, here." He's like, "I bought you this like gold cigarette case holder."
Yeah.
And Brian's just like, "Well, I can't possibly accept this, blah 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 blah." And then later on, they go to his summer home, and Brian is looking for clothes, and Max is just like, "Oh, here, have some of mine." And he puts some clothes on the bed,
Hmm.
and he goes rummaging through it, and he finds the gold cigarette case.
Right.
And then later on, when things are getting a little steamier, Max is looking for a cigarette and Brian pulls out the gold case.
Mm-hmm.
Like the visual metaphor of the gold case. I was like, okay, interesting. By the way, if there are any wealthy German barons who are looking for a sugar baby, I might be taking applications, but
You might be taking gold cigarette cases.
I'll accept. I'll start smoking again if you buy me one. But anyways, yeah, I liked the buildup of tension. Even though it's not as shocking to modern audiences, I liked that build.
Especially because right off the bat, it feels like Max is trying to steal Sally away.
It's like, bro, he's stealing your girl.
Yeah, and I think there's the hesitation that Brian has that we as the audience are made to feel like the hesitation there is because he's clearly trying to steal her away, but really Max's deep ulterior motive is to really start a relationship with both of them.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very ahead of its time the way it portrays polyamory. What's interesting though is that, this is touching on just how self-centered Sally is. When he says, "So do I," you see the shock in her eyes.
Yes.
Like it never occurred to her that they might be bumping uglies behind her back.
Yes.
So.
And that's again goes back to the scene where the English lesson scene where Sally is the center of the universe.
Yes.
And every time that Sally is presented with the fact that she is not the center of the universe, she is absolutely shocked. She is mortified, and that's where she basically tries to blow up the situation or sabotage the situation.
Basically, yeah. It's very. I think I like the way you phrase that though. Like first 10 minutes, you're like, I like Sally. By the end of the movie, you're like, I've had enough of Sally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's not to say again that Liza Minnelli.
Oh yeah,
Isn't
she's
incredible.
fantastic. Yeah.
Especially like the musical performances. Like to see her live on Broadway would have absolutely been something that you would have had to gone and seen at that time.
I did do a little research ahead in time, and I guess in the original stage or like the original novel or the original musical, like they really emphasize how part of the tragedy of Sally's character is that she's not as good a performer as she thinks she is.
Right.
And I guess some people took issue with the casting of Liza Minnelli because she was too good.
Yes.
So, which by the way, that's when you know you've made it. When people are complaining that you're too good at what you do.
Although, what I will say though is I think that in movie world, like having her clearly not necessarily a great musical artist on stage there, I think people would have looked at that and been like, she wasn't the right person for this role.
Well, thinking about it now, it would probably have also just made her a lot more pathetic and a lot less likable.
Yes.
Like, I think people might have actually had a harder time sitting through the movie if she wasn't good.
At something.
Yeah. Like, we, as viewers and as readers or whatever, we're really drawn to characters who are good at stuff.
Yeah.
So if she was just loud and boisterous and wanted to be the center of attention and also wasn't that great.
Right.
Yeah. She'd be a harder pill to swallow.
Yeah. And you know what? Let's quickly talk about I'm gonna pull this discussion up and then maybe we'll talk about a couple of other in front of the camera discussions, but I want to talk sequels and prequels and reboots, and specifically I want to talk about the origins of Cabaret, and that being the 1966 Broadway musical, which itself is based on Christopher Isherwood's semi-autobiographical novel, The Berlin Stories.
Interesting.
Christopher Isherwood, basically, the book is very much rooted in his experiences when he traveled to Berlin in early 1930s and lived with somebody not called Sally Bowles, but Jean Ross, who he based the character of Sally Bowles off of. And there's a very different feel to the book than there is to the Broadway musical and the film musical. And a lot of stark differences between the portrayals as well. Sally Bowles in the book, who is actually based on Jean Ross, is very, very different character. She is somebody who is imperfect. Like she's not very good at, she actually was kind of mediocre singer.
Okay.
And theater presence. And she also, from what I read, she was less boisterous. She was definitely as promiscuous, but less like, boisterous and needing to be the center of attention all of the time.
So less loud.
Yeah, and so it changed a little bit for the play, I believe, but then Liza Minnelli actually also kind of took a different approach with the character as well, and based the character off of a 30s actor and a 30s musical star as well. And so she kind of put her own spin on things, and that's actually who she even based her looks off of as well. And so that definitely changes the tone of the film a little bit. The other thing that's very starkly different from the book, and this is actually a big critique that Christopher Isherwood and his friends had with the film, is that it glamorized what 1930s Berlin felt and looked like. Because in 1930s Berlin, there was like hopeless poverty.
Oh yeah, it was super depressed, right?
Like people were literally starving on the streets. Like it was a horrible, horrible time to live there. Like they were saying, like Gene Ross said that everybody was just broke. Like they would have never gone out to these restaurants that they were depicted as going out to in the film. Like it kind of almost like romanticizes a little bit like what Berlin is like at this time. Like it's just like this melding pot where it really wasn't like that.
Yeah, it's funny. The movie pays lip service to the fact that everyone's broke, but like characters complain about being broke, but nobody seems to be hurting all that much.
Mm-hmm. And so that kind of does a disservice a little bit to kind of showing Berlin in the 30s and the rise of Nazi Germany, because, and this is something that I remember learning back in my history class and it's something that like as a kid, when you're learning about how evil the Nazis are, you never think about like the fact that like there had to have been something to push people to find a scapegoat or something like that kind of thing. And
like things had to have been pretty bad.
Yeah, and I'm not going to defend the Nazis, obviously.
No.
But like
this is a very, you know what? Let's just say it. This is an anti-Nazi podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like
we are not fans.
Yeah, but at the same time, like you do have to understand the pretense to the rise of the Nazis and like how crushingly in poverty Germany was at this time post World War I. And it's actually really interesting because the novel really paints that portrait of what Germany is like. And I actually had a quote here. Give me 1 second. I want to find. Okay, so the quote that I wanted to bring up is actually from George Orwell, who wrote 1984. So he actually, when he spoke about the original book that this is based on, he has a really famous quote that he said, "Reading such tales as this, the thing that surprises one is not that Hitler came to power, but that he did not do so several years earlier."
Wow.
And I think that's part of what this movie is missing is that like how horrible the situation was there. Because and you know what, and this is a little bit the discussion that I wanted to have with you as well, is that I was kind of expecting the backdrop of this movie, like the background of this movie, to be what this movie is really about, like the rise of fascism in Germany. But at some point in the film, I actually kind of realized that was actually the secondary story happening here. I thought it was the primary story hiding as a secondary story, but I realized that it was just a secondary story here. I don't know if you have thoughts on that or not.
I don't know that I'd agree that it's a secondary story, but it's definitely it's something that starts in the background that like slowly emerges center stage
right
as the movie unfolds. Actually, the final shot of the movie is quite upsetting.
Yes. It's a really interesting, and actually this is one of my other favorite aspects of the film, is the end of the movie, because the movie ends where it begins, but with Nazis.
So just to describe it, it mirrors the opening shot with like this distorted glass in the Kit Kat Club, but then it pulls back and it shows that the whole audience is filled with Nazis.
Yeah, well, it almost rewinds, because if you think about like walking through the opening scene of the movie, it's the glass, it's the MC's face, and then it's Brian arriving on the train into Berlin, and it's
right.
Sally's like, grand entrance into the musical number. And in this case, it's Brian leaving Berlin and him and Sally breaking off their relationship, and Sally going back to being just a cabaret singer. And then we get the final shot of the broken glass, and everybody in the audience is a Nazi.
Is a Nazi.
And
Yeah.
I thought that was a really powerful way to end the movie.
Also, the fact that there's no music over the credits.
Yes, and that actually happens in the opening credits as well, and I found that quite jarring too. And it really kind of sets the tone of the movie.
Interesting. I
and
didn't notice it was quiet in the opening.
Silent. In the
Dead
opening.
ass silent.
And it was something that I very jarringly noted down, is that I was like, and I said that to Jess, I was like, is it just me or is there no sound here? And she was like, yeah, there isn't. And I was like, this is very jarring for a musical. Like, I was expecting there to be, like, very loud and flashy music to start off the film.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't start until after the glass scene where the MC starts singing.
Interesting. I didn't notice that during the beginning, but I thought over the credits, over the Nazis, it was like, oh, okay, this is bad.
Yeah.
Like, there's no music left in the world.
Yeah.
But no, I don't know that I would agree with I know what you're saying. I don't know if that's how I would phrase it, though, that it's a secondary story.
I guess the rise of Nazism isn't secondary, but it's like, I guess I would have
It's
wanted
not
to...
the focus of the movie,
Yeah.
but it's kind of like this sword of Damocles hanging over everything.
Yeah,
There's that great moment where Maximilian is like, those wacky Nazis, like they're just they're useful, like they're chasing off the communists.
Right.
And then I think in the next scene they're driving by what looks like the Nazis have murdered some dude in the streets.
Right.
And it's like, oh yeah, they're harmless.
Well, yeah, and then it builds up to the scene where they're at that beer garden, and we get that really beautiful rendition of a song, "Tomorrow Belongs to Me," and as the camera pans away, it becomes chillingly apparent that it's a Hitler Youth Nazi singing this song, and then everybody starts to join in, and it really becomes like a
patriotic rallying cry.
Yeah, for the Nazis, and it's like, oh, like this is starting to get scary. Like this is where, the turning point and the point of no return starts to happen, and it feels like, that was a very important moment.
That's almost kind of like the cinematic highlight of the movie.
Yeah.
It's also the only musical number that takes place outside the Kit Kat Club.
Yes, and
Yeah.
and the legacy of that song is very interesting, and I want to talk about that more in Legacy, but I want to leave that for now, I think, in this part of our discussion.
I think what's especially disturbing about that scene is how beautiful the song is.
Yes.
Like, you get kind of sucked in, and then you're like, oh.
Yes,
Oh,
what the
no.
song really means.
Yeah.
And what it's a rallying cry for.
The whole Nazi thing kind of, it sort of also interferes with Fritz and Natalia's relationship.
Yeah, and the B plot for sure. Like,
Because she kind of breaks up with him because she's scared of what'll happen if he associates with her.
right, and then we find out actually the big twist is that Fritz is actually Jewish.
Right. And my favorite part is he's like, "Oh, you're Jewish?" He's like, doesn't he kind of just say, he's like, "Yeah, I just wrote something different on my like passport."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, it's that easy, huh?" Like, yeah.
Really?
Cool.
In that day and age, sure, why not?
Probably.
It's like the tragic comedy aspect of it. It's like Shakespearean almost.
It was kind of a beautiful twist.
Yeah.
Where he's Jewish the whole time.
You're right.
He was just faking it.
Yeah, and how that comes to bite him.
Yeah, and then again, going back to that final image, the kind of threat that everyone's gonna die.
Yeah.
That Sally has. She gave up her relationship with Brian and her baby so she could keep living this frivolous showgirl lifestyle. Only that she'll probably end up murdered because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Nazis weren't too crazy about that sort of thing.
Now, she's an American in Berlin, so there is a high probability that she can get out. And
Hopefully.
maybe not. Maybe in Nazi Germany or 1930s Germany, it's harder to get out at that point. But like we've seen that in modern day where, the U.S. starts to say, oh, you need to get out of Russia, or oh, you need to get out of Ukraine kind of thing. And you would expect that people who want to get out have the accessibility to do that, right?
You'd hope so. I mean, at the very least, her livelihood's going to be taken away.
Oh, for sure.
Because they're absolutely going to shut the Kit Kat Club down.
Yeah, that's definitely a big no-no in fascism.
Yeah. Fascism is not good for business.
Yes. Fascism may be good for business, depending on what business you run.
I guess so.
And if it's the business of anything promiscuous or anything not conservative, then you're not in for a great time.
No.
I want to move back to sequels, prequels, and reboots very briefly again before we move on. So, again, based on the book, And the original Broadway, there's some pretty stark differences between that and this that I want to mention. There's actually some pretty big things that were cut from the Broadway portion. So there was actually two other characters that weren't in the film. There was Fraulein Schneider, who runs a boarding house, and then the love interest for her is Herr Schultz, and they also have kind of like a doom romance plot similar to Natalia and Fritz's. But theirs is basically like one of them is not Jewish, the other one is Jewish, and then there's more of like an apparent like rise in anti-Semitism in that storyline that gets cut from this.
Okay, interesting.
As well, a lot of the songs were removed or even changed from the Broadway play, so that kind of significantly alters the focus point of the film as well. So it'd be really interesting to watch the Broadway play and kind of compare and contrast the two.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing it, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I already mentioned this as well, but Isherwood, a lot of the inspiration of this came from him living in the 30s in Germany, and he was also a gay man living in Germany at this time. So a lot of this is, and it feels like these are real people. Like, even though Sally is who she is and is so like gargantuan in like her personality, she feels like a real person.
We've met Sallys in our life.
Exactly, and I said that already.
You sure did.
And it's same with Brian. Like I've met Brian's in my life. Like I know these people, and it like that part feels very genuine to me.
Yeah.
And so kind of the other big changes here, or actually similarities here, is that so Jean Ross, who Sally Bowles is based on, it was a real character, and that Baron Max was actually based on a real person too, who also kind of wooed both of them, brought them to his kind of big summer house, and then also dropped them, like kind of out of the blue kind of situation. It was a very similar relationship that they had with him.
Actually, to be fair, like, Brian kind of calls Sally on that, because she kind of feels like she has him wrapped around her finger, and she pretty clearly doesn't.
Yeah. And he knows, like, and that's what I appreciate about Brian is even though he's painfully awkward, he's actually much more socially aware than Sally is.
I don't even know that I'd say he's awkward. I think he's just incredibly reserved.
Yes, okay, that's a better way to put it. I would agree.
I would agree. He never comes across as socially inept, just extremely, maybe a little reluctant to get his hands dirty.
Mm-hmm. What's also interesting is in Christopher Isherwood's later memoir that he wrote after this film, he actually said that Jean Ross never actually tried to seduce him.
Tragic.
And so that kind of was something that he had just written for the book that was more like, it was more like hammed up, especially the Broadway play.
Fan fiction starring him and his friend.
Yeah. And he actually became, like, he was really critical of the film when it came out, and part of it was partially actually because he felt that the film was too hesitant with Brian being gay.
Right, because he's gay in the musical, but he's bi in the movie.
Right, and it's kind of like, it feels like they kind of pull away from that at one point. Like, when him and Sally start that relationship together, it feels like kind of a pull away. Like they kind of turn face a little bit on where they're taking Brian's character.
Well, just thinking about it now, if the genders were reversed, and it was like, oh, is she gay? And then it's like, nope, she just didn't have sex with the right man. Yeah, that would be really problematic.
Yeah, and so like I could see why he would be upset with that, and I think it's kind of valid as well. Like I think it's a valid complaint that we're kind of led to believe that Brian is gay, and then it's like, well, maybe he's not quite gay, and then it feels like
he'll have sex with Liza Minnelli. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't think it ruins the character, but I can understand why the original author would be quite upset about it.
So that's a lot of like what I wanted to talk about in sequels, prequels, and reboots. Before we talk about effects and filming, I kind of want to talk about score, because this is kind of also very important to the film because it's a musical, right?
It is a musical, yes.
The score is actually, a lot of it came from the Broadway play, but there was some original pieces here. It was written by a songwriting duo known as John Kander and Fred Ebb. They also scored Chicago, so another Bob Fosse film, as well as New York, New York, the Martin Scorsese film, and the song New York, New York. You know the song New
York,
York.
New York. I'm still boggled. It boggles my mind that Martin Scorsese did a musical.
And you know the song before
Yeah,
you knew it was a movie.
I didn't even. Yeah, damn it, Scorsese, you did it again.
So let's talk our favorite songs, because I want to hear what are your two favorite songs? What were the bangers for you?
The big banger for me was the one your fiance was singing earlier.
Maybe this time.
Maybe this time, yeah.
Yeah, that's Jess's favorite. She knew that one coming in.
It's probably the only one I'll probably remember tomorrow.
Yeah, that's fair. My personal favorite was Money Money.
That was pretty good too.
Just because I liked the intro when they're both like money.
Well, you're also an accountant.
Yeah.
Like, I assume they just play that song over the speakers in your office.
Money makes the world go round, the world go round, the world go round.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my favorite song by far. The opener was really great, like I said, and part of the reason why the opener was so great is just because of like the choreography. I loved the choreography of the opening song.
Can I just say, earlier you mentioned that you really liked the musicals and you thought it added a lot to it.
Yeah.
By the end, I was kind of pretty clearly scrolling my phone during the musical numbers.
Yeah,
it was hard for me not to feel like the musical numbers were kind of like intermissions.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Maybe there's a cut of this movie where somebody cut out most of the musical numbers, and that's the cut for me.
Yeah, that's fair. It's because it's such a unique style, and it's never really been done before. It's never really been done since, and you can't blame Bob Fosse for.
No, I don't think it's poorly done or anything. I just don't think it was for me.
Yeah, and that's fair.
Yeah.
All right, we talked about this like 2 seconds ago, but Tomorrow Belongs to Me, very controversial song today. It's kind of been red pilled, blue pilled.
I think red pilled.
Yeah, where it's become kind of a neo-Nazi symbol song. Which is somewhat unfortunate because John Kander and Fred Ebb wrote the song for this film and are both Jewish people, and it was written as kind of like a...
Like an FU to the Nazis?
Yeah, it's like almost like a parody, but like we see with a lot of like very famous songs, often when you parody a genre or a theme in a song, you often become credited with making a very hit song of that genre. And I'm going to give you a couple examples here, and you might not be as in the know of music culture as I am, but the song Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana is very much in the same vein, where they were actually, the song Smells Like Teen Spirit is actually kind of a parody of pop rock at that time, and it became one of the most famous Nirvana songs. And same with MGMT and their song Kids. And you would know MGMT, they're kind of that electronic band from the 2000s, and they were trying to be anti that genre and pop party music, and in making parody music like this, they became known for those songs, and those songs are what put them on the map.
It's awkward when the thing, you're trying to make fun of something, but you end up just boosting it a little bit. Interesting.
So it's kind of in that similar vein, and like I said, it's like the Matrix, how the effect of red pilling, where oftentimes things that are being used in one way are commandeered by bad actors.
Well, like when people don't get the irony behind something. Interesting. It kind of, this is a weird example, but like it kind of reminds me of a Shylock's speech from that, what's that Shakespeare play? Like, it's like, if you cut us, do we not bleed? God, I'm really betraying my fellow English grads. You know what?
I can't help you with this one.
No. But you know the speech I'm talking about, right? It's where the guy's like, if you cut us, do we not bleed? Like, you know, Shylock, it's a Jewish character from a Shakespeare play. The speech has been kind of, people have taken that speech out of context as sort of like a cry for mercy, when in the context of the original play, it's a character screaming about all the revenge he wants. That example would have been better if I remembered more details, but...
Effects of filming.
Okay.
One of my favorite sections to talk about. We actually already talked about that Liza Minnelli was considered too talented for the role because of Sally Bowles being kind of an amateur, and that the daughter of Judy Garland is kind of like the exact opposite of the character of Jean Ross and Sally Bowles. The other part of this I want to talk about, we don't usually discuss this, but I think this is actually very interesting, is the other actors that were considered for the roles here. Because especially in like a rom-com, where a relationship between the two main stars can make or break the film, I'm going to read off some of the other people who could have been Brian and Sally. So up for the role of Brian was Malcolm McDowell, David Hemmings, Timothy Dalton, Leonard Whiting, Jeremy Irons, John McInerney, Bruce Robinson, Tim Curry, and Paul Nichols.
Tim Curry?
Yeah.
There's a lot of villains in that list.
There is, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that they have the right person here because it really took a very particular British person to portray who Brian was.
Yes.
It's very interesting to consider Jeremy Irons or even Tim Curry in the role, but I think they're almost too charismatic for the character of Brian.
Yeah, they're too... It's hard to think of them back then. It's hard not to imagine them now in the role.
Right.
So it's... Yeah.
Yeah, but back then, like, Tim Curry was doing, like, Rocky Horror Picture Show and stuff, so that, like...
I just have a hard time picturing young Jeremy Irons.
Yeah.
He'll always be Scar to me.
And even Malcolm McDowell as, like, Clockwork Orange, right?
Oh, yeah. No, sorry.
So I think they landed on the right person there.
I think I read somewhere that, like, he turned the role down when he found out it was a non-singing part.
Yes, you are correct.
But then, does Malcolm McDowell sing? I guess so.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not as well versed in Malcolm McDowell's.
The McDowellies.
And then female actors up for the role: Ursula Andress, Julie Andrews, Anne Margaret, Faye Dunaway, Jane Fonda, Jill Ireland, Glenda Jackson, Shirley MacLaine, Barbara Streisand, Brenda Ficcaro, Natalie Wood. I don't know every name there.
I don't know most of those names.
Faye Dunaway was the main woman in Network.
Also Bonnie and Clyde, I think.
Yeah, also Bonnie and Clyde. Jane Fonda's a very relevant actor. Barbara Streisand.
Yeah.
I think that Liza Minnelli is the right person for this role because she's the selling feature of the film. Like, it's like,
yeah.
Liza Minnelli.
Yeah.
Culturally significant, one of the most culturally significant female performers of all time.
Yeah, I can't imagine, the casting was on point for this movie.
Yep.
Like, yeah, I can't imagine really anyone else in those roles.
And this is the other point that I want to make is, I kind of said it already, but like the chemistry between co-stars in a romance film is what makes or break the movie. And I think it's incredible that Liza Minnelli and Michael York succeed in making two drastically different people who are unlikely lovers feel sincere.
Yeah.
Like, it feels sincere that they would end up together, even though there's no way that they would have ended up together.
Yeah, I agree with that. I will give the movie credit for that. You know what? I think part of it is you see them, you believe they're friends.
Yes.
Before you believe that they're lovers.
Yes, I think that buildup is extremely important to buying into their relationship.
Yeah.
But I wanted to give kudos there because I think both of them had big roles to sell.
Yes, I agree. Kudos all around.
Yes, and I was looking for this earlier. Sally Bowles, like who Liza Minnelli based it on, is the jazz age icon Louise Brooks. And the silent films that if you really wanted to see what she's basing the character off of are from Pandora's Box and Diary of a Lost Girl from 1929.
I'll be sure to check those out. Maybe this time.
So the last kind of thing that I wanted to discuss here was Joel Grey. So Bob Fosse, the director, was actually looking for a very different character and person to portray the MC in this film, and he actually wanted himself to be that guy. He wanted to portray the character himself, but the studio made him cast Joel Grey in this role. And so it actually made their relationship and filming this very difficult for both of them.
A little needlessly antagonistic, I would imagine.
Yeah, although, like I said, Joel Grey is one of the highlights of the movie for me.
Yeah, I don't know what this director looks like, but I think...
he kind of almost has like a Frank Sinatra look to him.
Oh, so more conventionally handsome?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would say Joel Grey is the better choice, not just because of his obvious talent, but just because he's so... Like, he's not ugly, but he's just very odd-looking, and that really helps with this character.
Yeah.
Not ugly, just odd-looking.
Yeah. So Legacy. It's time to talk Oscars. So let me read out what it won for, what it was nominated for, and then we'll discuss. So wins 8 Oscars. Like
Tight.
I said, the most ever wins for a movie that does not ultimately win Best Picture.
Or include Hobbits.
Yeah. So it wins Best Actress in a Leading Role for Liza Minnelli, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Joel Grey, Best Director, Best Cinematographer, Best Art Direction, Best Sound, Best Film Editing, Best Music, and Original Song Score. It's nominated and loses Best Picture and Best Writing Screenplay based on material from another medium. So let's break that down into kind of bite-sized chunks here. Joel Grey, I think, bar none, deserves the supporting Oscar role. He is competing against Robert Duvall, James Caan, and Al Pacino.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, like, he's the highlight of this film. He's so charismatic. He's such a unique character that we've never seen on screen before or since. Like, he is a performance all on his own in this film. And when I'm at my fullest attention with this film is whenever he's on. All of it's very enchanting, and I think that they were right to have him win, because I think all of the other performances are much better, are maybe better film performances, but this is like a performance that you set aside on a separate pedestal that wins like an artsy award like an Oscar.
You know, I can see what you're saying, but I think if I were Emperor of the Universe, I would have given those awards to either Robert Duvall or James Caan.
I think James Caan's the front runner in the Godfather race for supporting, and I wouldn't say that he didn't deserve it, and in any other year he would have won it, but because this is such like a completely unique performance that no other person could ever pull off.
I guess for me, it's hard. That's harder for me to swallow just because I wasn't that interested in the musical sections.
Yes.
My attention started wandering. And also, to me, he's kind of barely a character. Well, I shouldn't say that. Like, Joel Grey did a great job. It's just, you know what I mean? Like, he's not...
Like I said, he's a force. Like,
yeah.
Like, they use it really effectively. Like, I really loved when the film starts to get dark and they cut to his face just to, like, say, like, money. Or like something, and like it kind of punctuates things, because like I said, there are points where I was like, is this man representative of the devil?
Almost. He's some kind of gatekeeper.
Yeah.
But that's interesting though.
So okay, well, we don't agree on that. Let's talk Liza Minnelli, Best Actress, leading role.
Yeah.
Not even comparable to anybody in The Godfather, obviously.
Yeah, sorry, Talia Shire.
Completely deserves the award there. She portrays the character really well because, like we've talked about a few times now, she's very naive. She's a character that you like right off the bat, and by the time you realize how toxic of a person she truly is, it's too late for anybody around her. Like, it's too late for Brian to get out of there intact.
It's almost too late for her.
Yeah.
Like, she figures out... By the end of the movie, she does say, like, I'm a self-indulgent twerp, basically. Yeah. She doesn't say twerp, but you know what I mean.
Yep. Best Director, Bob Fosse. I really hesitate to not give this to Francis Ford Coppola here.
Yeah, I mean, it's the freaking Godfather.
Right.
Like, come on.
And of the two that have held up better, it's the Godfather.
It's definitely the Godfather.
I think on review, I think the Academy was wrong with that.
Yeah, you did a good job.
However, sometimes, as we all know, the Oscars give the award to somebody for past
glory.
Achievements.
Yeah.
And in this case, Coppola was not Coppola quite yet. Like, The Godfather was what put Coppola on the map.
Yeah, like, Coppola was like our age.
Yeah.
Just randomly directed The Godfather.
Yeah.
Pretty crazy.
And so I can see why the Academy went with Bob Fosse, but I think in hindsight, I think that was the wrong choice for Best Director.
I agree.
Best Cinematography. This is an interesting one because The Godfather uses its dark shots and its natural lighting extraordinarily effectively, and it becomes a character in that film. However, Cabaret is a much more conventional use of cinematography. It's a very interesting debate between the two, I think.
It's almost like comparing apples to oranges. Like, they're such different... They have such different goals. I don't even really know. I think I would give it to The Godfather just because the imagery is more striking to me. That said, the musical sequences in particular were pretty...
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, and it could be a toss-up either way, because The Godfather's much more original and unique in how it uses its lighting, and Cabaret is much flashier. And so Cabaret is going to immediately appeal to somebody.
You know what? here's a rant. Here's something.
Yeah.
It's almost like comparing a Brandon Sanderson novel to a Stephen King novel.
Right.
It's like saying which is better. Well, it's like they're both doing different things. Like
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
Yeah. That's a tough one.
It depends on what you like.
Yeah. So here's the question then. Best Picture. Was The Godfather the right pick?
Let me think about that for 1 second. Yes.
Yes. I agree. The Godfather was the right pick. There's no doubt about it. The Godfather, this is maybe one of the few times that the Oscars get it right, where The Godfather is the most culturally significant film in 50 years.
Yeah.
And it actually does win the Oscar.
Yep, and Will Smith didn't slap Francis Ford Coppola or anything. Like,
well, we already talked about the Marlon Brando controversy.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
there was enough controversy that year.
Yeah.
Jeez.
But yeah, I very much agree. It's not even a conversation. The Godfather is the better of the two films.
Better screenplay as well.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. And that's partially why it holds up so well, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think where I'm going to leave this section is I found a review actually that I thought was really interesting. And this came out of The Guardian, and it's David Benedict writing about how Cabaret influenced musical films. He said, back then, musicals were already low on filmgoers' lists, so how come it was such a success? Simple. Cabaret is the musical for people who hate them. Given the vibrancy of its now iconic numbers, Liza Minnelli in bowler and black suspenders astride a bentwood chair belting out Mine Her, or shimmying and shivering with pleasure over Money with Joel Grey, it sounds strange to say it, but one of the chief reasons why Cabaret is so popular is that it's not shot like a musical. I think he's onto something there with that.
Yeah, that's very well said.
And it's something that you're almost saying as well, is that like
you could show someone this and they wouldn't know it was a musical.
You could cut 5 numbers out and it's not a musical anymore, and it still works as a film.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a very interesting analysis and a very interesting kind of look at the legacy of this film, because this one's definitely less apparent on the immediate culture, like the zeitgeist, than The Godfather is.
Yeah.
But where it influenced musicals, I think it had an impact, but it was on a very particular genre rather than the far-reaching changes that The Godfather made to modern cinema.
Yeah, it's almost kind of unfortunate. It's like Farrah Fawcett dying the same day as Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
It's like, you picked the wrong day to die.
All right, so personal reviews of the partner factor. You want to start?
Sure. I didn't watch this with a partner.
Yep.
I watched this in my living room. My roommate got home from work early, so he watched part of it. You know what's funny? He watched like the first 5 minutes, and he looked over at me, and he said, "I think Blake hates you. I think he wants to torture you." And then he left to run some errands, so didn't hold his attention.
Yep.
Personal review. You know what? I'm a little mixed on it.
Yeah.
It's probably just not for me. Like I said, a friend in college did show it to me like 10, 11 years ago. I remembered a little bit of it, but yeah, it wasn't really for me. By the end, you know how you said by the end you're like, that's enough of you, Sally Bowles.
Yeah.
By the end I was like, that's enough of you, Cabaret.
Yeah. I am actually on a very same plane with you. And Jess actually was in this exact same boat, where it's funny because I walked in this movie, like I said, that first number really drew me in, and I thought I was really going to end up walking away really happy with this one. But like, there's no characters that I personally connected with as much, just because Sally is who Sally is. And we talked about, like, you know, how Brian's character is, because he's so shy, and I didn't feel the connection with Brian as much. The pacing's a little rough at times, and you might be right onto something, that like the music numbers being like so formulaically cut between each scene does kind of maybe make things a little jarring and does extend the movie.
Yeah, like I'll be honest, I think I've said this already. Like, whenever a musical numbers start, I'll be like, okay, check your phones. Like,
yeah,
all right, the music's done. Like,
yeah,
okay, you know what? Cards on the table. When I skipped the last 3 musical numbers. Like, I just fast forwarded through them.
That was quite a review.
Yeah, all right.
Didn't see that coming.
Wasn't gonna admit it, but there it is.
Wow.
Sorry, guys.
Some
music.
And you know what? And that's something I'll also say is like I often find when I'm watching a musical, there are like 3, 4 songs that really get into my head for the next week, and I haven't found that with this one.
Mm.
And even like a really, really good soundtrack from a movie, like if there's an all-star soundtrack, and I'm thinking most recently of The Godfather, obviously, where it's like da na na na
Na,
na
na,
na na,
na, na.
where like something like that pops in your head every once in a while. So that I watched The Godfather like several weeks ago now, and I can still, off the top of my cusp, say that, but I can't do that with any of the songs from this. And I just recently watched this, and that speaks to some of the forgettableness and some of the musical numbers.
Yeah.
And so that's maybe why. Like I think the film is successful in some areas. I think that this film is considered one of the gayest films in the Oscars ever, and I think that it very much
I do want to clarify. I don't think this movie's bad by any means.
No.
I just don't think it was for me.
No, and I agree. And I don't think this film was for me. I think that like it succeeds in a few different areas, and I can very much tip my hat to where it succeeds. I absolutely loved Joel Grey's performance in this one. I thought Liza Minnelli and Michael York do a fantastic job with everything they're given. Even
Sure,
though,
sure.
Like, I don't necessarily like the character by the end of the film. What's really interesting about this film is that the film, at no point, never once, does this film quite get to a tone of cheeriness. And it's kind of shocking to think about that, because I think as the audience, it's hard to walk away really happy or excited about this one, because there's no point that there's no like, yeah, like fist in the air kind of moment with this film. There's no big celebratory moment, you know?
Yeah, but at the same time, I think that was by design.
Yeah, and
There is kind of an underlying sadness to this movie.
yeah, and that's what I mean. Like even when something minorly happy happens, there's always this underlying, but it's gonna there's going to be tragedy here, or
Yeah.
or there's you're happy about one thing, and then you're like, but the Nazis are coming.
Yeah, even like Fritz and Natalia, they do get
Yeah.
married, and it's
And you're
But
like,
it's still
but this
kinda-
is doomed.
you're like, ah, shit.
Yeah, like it's this movie that like it constantly like gives you a little and takes from you at the same time.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I love being depressed. I love downers, but yeah,
It's
but
it's
that
very
might be,
successful at it, but it doesn't necessarily make it a memorable or rewatchable film.
yeah, no, like again, I don't mind. Like in some ways, I almost thrive on depressing works of fiction, but this movie didn't work for me for different reasons.
Yeah.
Maybe this time he'll say we're all gonna die. We're all gonna get killed by Nazis. You
What a-
should make that the opening line for this episode.
Jesus. What a happy way to end things.
We're
on,
all
Michael.
gonna get killed by Nazis.
Okay, so up and coming, we have our next film, which is our annual music or mystery film. But because we've done a musical recently and we did a musical last year, I think we're going to go with a mystery here.
That sounds good.
And it's also kind of relevant because of how important Glass Onion was over the holidays. I think we can kind of compare it to that film, and I think that's an interesting discussion to talk about a mystery in that light. And also, the frontrunner that I have in mind for this old film is actually the movie Clue, based on the board game.
Okay.
And part of the reason why I think that's the frontrunner in my mind is because, not having seen it, but I think it has a similar tone to Glass Onion, which is going to make it an interesting discussion point.
I haven't seen Glass Onion.
Well, you're going to have to watch Glass Onion, I think, over the next couple weeks. Have you seen the original Knives Out?
Nope.
What?
I haven't seen it.
Okay. Wow.
It's funny how for someone who's been to film school and who's on a film podcast, how many gaping holes there are in my resume.
Yeah, you need to watch more movies during the week.
Yeah, I guess so.
But, okay, well, your assignment then is to watch one of those this week, and then we'll watch one of the other ones coming up in a few weeks. And
Okay.
let us know, like, if Clue, if it's not Clue, then what should we watch?
Yeah, if there's another good mystery from like the 80s or 90s or before, let us know.
Yeah,
And maybe we'll watch
and
it.
maybe with a mystery with a bit of a comedic tone to it, like an ensemble kind of film, because that's what
Yeah.
I'm looking for here.
Okay, that's what Blake wants.
Yeah,
Blake, you're like a talent scout right now.
yeah,
and
I'm
that's
scouting talent.
Yeah. You're like a literary agent being like, this is what I want.
That's what I always saw myself as. So
Well, there you
I'm
go.
a talent agent.
Okay.
All right. Well, have a good one, everyone.